I, Lodovico di Leonardo Bonoro di Simone, record that on this day, March 6th, 1474, 4 or 5 hours before daybreak, a male child was born to me at Caprese. On the 8th of the same month, in the church of Santo Giovanni, he was baptized. I gave him the name Michelangelo.
High on this remote hill in Italy, in the little Tuscan village of Caprese, where his father was the podestà, or mayor, Michelangelo, who is to pass most of his life in torment, to become the last, perhaps the greatest, of the giants in art bequeathed us by the 15th century, begins that life peacefully. Soon after, his family moves to its home in Settignano. Ripe with olives and rich with stone. The hills of Settignano provide a livelihood to the people of the district, who work its outcroppings with chisel and hammer. Amidst its rocks and quarries, Michelangelo is put to wet nurse with a stonecutter's wife, not unlike this child in one of his drawings. Years later, he jests,
"What good I have comes because I sucked in chisels and hammers with my nurse's milk."
Not far away, indeed within sight of Settignano, lay Florence. And here, perhaps before he is 10 years old, Michelangelo comes to live. Live with his father and stepmother. His mother had died when he was only 6. And 4 brothers. What a revelation is Florence, the heart and mind of the Renaissance. It is the city of Botticelli, who painted Spring, and Ghiberti, whose golden bronze doors Michelangelo later called
Fit for the gates of paradise.
But especially is Florence the city of its rulers, the rich and powerful family of the Medici, and its leader, Lorenzo, painted here as a young man in a fresco of the Procession of the Three Kings. In time, Michelangelo's life will come to touch this man's, but that time is not yet. First, there is to be Ghirlandaio, painter of Florence, then decorating the church of Santa Maria Novella, whose cloister Michelangelo enters at the age of 13, to be apprenticed to the artist with his father's reluctant blessing. One day, to the church of Santa Maria del Carmine, comes the student Michelangelo with other students, to copy from these frescoes of Masaccio in the Brancacci Chapel. This sketch of his, for example, has come down to us. While there, the story goes, as boastfully related some 20 years later by the artist Torrigiano to Benvenuto Cellini,
it was Michelangelo's habit to banter all who were drawing there. And one day, when he was annoying me, I got more angry than usual, and clenching my fist, gave him such a blow on the nose that I felt bone and cartilage go down like biscuit beneath my knuckles. And this mark of mine he will carry with him to the grave.
To Michelangelo, who is to become the supreme creator of beauty of his age, the ugly mark he cannot erase from his face is ever after to eat deeply into his sensitive soul. This, still intact, is a garden of the Medici. Rich with ancient statuary, it is similar, perhaps, to the one in which Michelangelo, as one of the promising students offered by Ghirlandaio, suddenly finds himself giving up his painting apprenticeship to embark upon a totally new career, sculpture, destined to engulf his life ever after. Under the old master Bertoldo, he studies in a school set up by Lorenzo to encourage, with the passing of the sculptors Donatello and Verrocchio, the rebirth of this ancient art in Florence. Strangely drawn to stone, as a hungry man to food, Michelangelo eagerly sets to work, in time fashioning a faun, since lost, which may have resembled this facsimile. Let his biographer, Vasari, continue.
He was polishing the faun one day when the Medici passed by. The great man stopped to examine the work and observed, "You have made this faun quite old, yet have left him with all his teeth." Michelangelo took the hint and knocked out a tooth from the upper jaw. When Lorenzo saw how cleverly he had performed the task, he resolved to provide for the boy's future and take him into his own household.
And so, Michelangelo enters such a home as he had never dreamed existed, living with Lorenzo and his sons virtually as a member of the family, amidst sumptuous surroundings. Tutored by some of the greatest scholars of the day assembled around Lorenzo, called the Plato Academy, his young, thirsty mind quenches itself with all the varied learning of the best intellects of the time. Inspired and guided by his mentors, he carves at 16, in the manner of Donatello, his first sculpture, a bas-relief, the Madonna of the Stairs. And around the same time, the first work in which is encountered both his original technique and his unique spirit, the Battle of the Centaurs. never truly to leave these centaurs. In 1492, after Michelangelo had lived with the Medici for about 2 years, Lorenzo the Magnificent dies. This is his death mask. With Lorenzo passes the golden age of the Renaissance. Here in Florence, at what was the convent of San Marco, lived the friar who had already risen to challenge Lorenzo and the Pope in Rome as well. And close by, as it was, his room with all his personal belongings. But the frightening voice is gone. The voice of a religious reformer that struck the ears like a clap of doom. Hypnotizing the city, crying anathema against corruption, vanity, wealth, and ostentation, threatening hellfire and damnation, thundering from the pulpits of Florence, the voice of the monk of San Marco, Savonarola. Michelangelo heard that voice. As fires burn in the city squares, consuming books, low-cut clothes, and nude paintings brought to it by such masters as Botticelli, Michelangelo, his world tumbling about him, finds by a torchlight's beams refuge in quarters of the convent of Santo Spirito. Here his friend, the liberal prior, permits him in secret to dissect the dead from its hospital, action the law forbids, that he might learn the anatomy he as an artist has to know. Such knowledge as is revealed to us in these drawings he left behind. For the prior of Santo Spirito, he carves, in thanks, a crucifix of wood, believed this one, recently discovered at Santo Spirito. The Florence to which Michelangelo returns is a city under the titular rule of a branch of the Medici that had joined the people in revolt, headed by a different Lorenzo, Lorenzo di Pierfrancesco, but under the spiritual rule of Savonarola, the spellbinding prior of San Marco, to whom the Florentines still listen as penitents roam the streets, wailing and predicting the last judgment. In this strange atmosphere, perhaps inspired by such cupids as may have decorated the Medici garden, Michelangelo carves a sleeping Cupid, since lost, possibly resembling this bronze by a later Roman sculptor, which he shows to the new Medici ruler.
The Medici said to Michelangelo, "If you were to bury it, I am certain it would pass for an antique. And if you made it look ancient and sent it to Rome, you would get much more for it there than here."
Some believe Michelangelo took this advice. Others, that it was a dealer who did so, passing it off as an antique to the powerful Cardinal Riario of Rome, who, discovering his mistake, sends for Michelangelo. However it may have come to pass, Michelangelo leaves for Rome to see the Cardinal. He is sad to leave Florence, but it is no longer the same Florence. Indeed, not too long after, the tortured city is to witness the hanging of Savonarola with 2 of his disciples as a false prophet. And afterwards, the burning of his body in the very square Michelangelo will one day decorate with one of his finest sculptures. In 1496, at the age of coming of age, 21, Michelangelo enters Rome for the first time. Rome of the Borgias, feverish, corrupt, unholy. He goes at once to see Cardinal Riario, who lived here. But it is not the cardinal, rather a devoted Roman banker, Jacopo Galli, who gives Michelangelo his first important commission, a Bacchus for his garden. This technical masterpiece is not the traditional Roman or Greek god, but a young man who has drunk so much he seems about to topple with the next step. So delighted is Galli with the Bacchus that he secures for Michelangelo a contract to carve for a French prince of the church desiring to leave a memorial behind him in Rome, the Virgin with the body of Jesus. The Vatican's renowned Pietà. This Pietà is the only statue Michelangelo ever signs. As Vasari, his biographer, tells the story,
It happened that one morning Michelangelo found a number of Lombard strangers there admiring it. And one of them asked who had made it, and another answered, "Our hunchback from Milan." It seemed strange to Michelangelo that his work should be attributed to someone else. So one night, he shut himself inside the church. And by candlelight, he cut on it.
Michelangelo Buonarroti of Florence made this.
with the Pietà, Michelangelo, at the age of 24, not only plumbs the depths of the human soul, but soars the heights of accomplishment to join the leading artists of his time. What draws Michelangelo back to Florence after an absence of 4 years is a temptation he cannot resist. Lying weather-beaten in the cathedral courtyard is a 17-foot piece of Carrara marble, attacked by a sculptor 40 years before and since declared ruined by all who saw it. Not Michelangelo. He agrees with the consuls of Florence to carve a colossal David from it, symbol of the city's liberation. And hidden behind a fenced enclosure set up alongside the cathedral, he eagerly begins. For 3 years, he chips away on the huge stone. Under the shadow of Brunelleschi's beautiful dome he so admired and one day would echo in St. Peter's in Rome. The David that stands outside today is but a copy of this one, the real David, that towers in Florence's Accademia. The great figure carved from a piece of deficient marble that had remained sleeping and untouched for over a century before responding to the greatest creative force of his age.
best of artists hath no thought to show which the rough stone in its superfluous shell doth not include. To break the marble spell is all the hand that serves the brain can do.
Now, taking an eternal theme of art, the Madonna and Child, Michelangelo, the giant David behind him, carves or paints 4 interpretations. This, known for the man for whom it was executed, is the Taddei Madonna. Then, for another private home, the Pitti Madonna. Experts regarding its enigmatic smile see the influence of the Mona Lisa of Leonardo da Vinci, a contemporary genius, one of the greatest the world has ever known, and with whom Michelangelo seems never able to pass a civil word. For 2 Bruges merchants, this Madonna of great dignity, exhibiting her princely child to her people. Finally, for this rich Florentine merchant, Angelo Doni, and his wife, this easel painting. It is the only easel painting generally recognized as by Michelangelo, perhaps his first painting since he was 14. Suddenly, a voice from the Vatican itself, the voice of militant Julius II, newly acceded to the papal throne, summons Michelangelo to Rome again. He makes his way through the corridors, and now for the first time, he looks upon that person who is for so long to be his master, the powerful, vigorous, stormy, passionate Pope who in many ways is the mirror of Michelangelo himself.
I would that you should carve my tomb.
And thus comes Michelangelo to the marble hills of Carrara. And thus, here, begins the saga that is to haunt the artist for virtually the rest of his life. As he begins upon the carvings, the excitement of the Pope, who has a drawbridge constructed that he might visit the artist unseen, is contagious. But suddenly, like a thunderclap, all is changed. Pope Julius loses interest. Quickly, Michelangelo hastens to the Pope. What happened is described in a sequence of his own letters and later recollections.
On Holy Saturday, I heard the Pope say that he did not mean to spend a coin more on stones, small or great. This caused me no little astonishment. However, before I left his presence, I asked for part of the money needed to carry on the work. His Holiness told me to return on Monday. I did so. And on Tuesday, and on Wednesday, and on Thursday. At last, on Friday morning, as I approached the palace again, I was turned away by the palace guards. I went home and I wrote as follows to the Pope. Most blessed Father, I have been turned out of the palace today by your orders. Wherefore, I give you notice that from this time forward, if you want me, you must look for me elsewhere than at Rome. The Pope, when he read my letter, sent 5 horsemen after me on my way to Florence.
Come back at once to Rome under penalty of our displeasure.
I replied to them, if the Pope would perform the conditions he was under with regard to me, I would return. But otherwise, he was not to expect to see me again.
Thus ends the first act of the tragedy that is to drag on for 40 more years. In Florence, the cathedral, Santa Maria del Fiore, stands patiently waiting for the 12 apostles he had agreed to carve for it. Only one had begun to emerge from its marble cocoon before his hasty trip to Rome. At the headquarters of the ruling body of Florence, as Michelangelo works, bitter and alone, a messenger mounts the stairs with a letter from the Pope.
Michelangelo, the sculptor, who left us without reason and in mere caprice, is afraid, we are informed, of returning. Knowing the humors of such men of genius, we rely on your loyalty to convince him in our name that if he returns to us, he shall be uninjured and unhurt.
To the consternation of the Florentines, Michelangelo refuses to return. Only when firmly informed that his native city does not wish to go to war with the Pope over his obstinacy, and he is given the status of an ambassador for his protection, does Michelangelo finally agree to go back. Not far away, in Bologna, where the militant Pope is ensconced with his armies in a mad campaign against the Bolognese nobles, Michelangelo hesitantly makes his way to the Pope's presence.
It was your duty to come to seek us, and you have waited till we came to seek you.
Michelangelo knelt and prayed for pardon. A certain prelate came forward and said, "Your Holiness, he did wrong through ignorance. These painters outside their art are all like this." Thereupon the Pope answered in fury,
It is you, not he, who are an ignoramus and a rascal. Get hence out of my sight, and bad luck to you.
So the Pope, having spent the surplus of his bile upon the bishop, took Michelangelo apart and pardoned him, and said,
I wish you to make my statue on a large scale in bronze. I mean to place it on the facade of San Petronio.
Michelangelo is obliged to undertake the job, and thus, for 12 long months, punctuated by letters to his father and brothers in Florence, Michelangelo labors alone in Bologna. At last, the 3 times life-size statue of Julius is hoisted to its pedestal on the facade of San Petronio. It stays there less than 3 years, only until the exiled Bolognese, returning and sending the papal legate fleeing, tumble the bronze to the ground. And the final irony, melt it to make a cannon named after the Pope to fire in their battles against him. So, by a typically tortuous route, does Michelangelo, again at the whim of Pope Julius II, come to confront perhaps his greatest challenge, the painting of the Vatican's now famous Sistine Chapel in Rome. This is the interior of the Sistine, somewhat as it may have looked when Michelangelo, despite his protest that
Painting is not my trade,
is literally commanded to decorate its vaulted ceiling soaring 50 feet above the floor. Michelangelo, the sculptor, begins painting. With these paintings, one of the greatest painters the world has ever known completes perhaps the greatest fresco the world has ever seen. On the curving ceiling of the Sistine, like a prologue to the panels themselves, those who prophesied the coming of Christ, the prophets. Then, those who divined Christ's birth, the Sibyls. Finally, like solos in a concert, his panels. The drunkenness of Noah. The flood. Noah's offering. The fall of man and the expulsion from the Garden of Eden. The creation of woman.
God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God separated the light from the darkness, calling the light day and the darkness night. And God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to separate day from night. Let them serve as signs and for the fixing of seasons." God called the dry land earth, and the assembled waters seas. And God saw that it was good. God said, "Let us make mankind in our image and likeness." God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created him.
Then only, in October 1512, does he whom God had touched in a special way descend from the scaffolding and cap this almost incredible accomplishment of his life with these simple words.
Dearest Father, I have finished the chapel I was painting. The Pope is very well satisfied.
But with Julius dead, it is now another pope's turn to tap Michelangelo's genius for himself. Pope Leo, the new pope, a Medici, demands a new facade for the family church in Florence, San Lorenzo. Despite Michelangelo's weeping protest that he cannot do Julius's tomb and the church front as well, a third contract is drawn, reducing the tomb from the original 40 figures to 20. And after designing this wooden model for the church, Michelangelo, now saddled with both tasks, leaves once again for the mountains as he had gone for the tomb before, in search of marble. The quarries of Monte Altissimo, not far from Florence, whose discovery excited the Medici, who owned them, much as a gold strike, promising to vie with the famous quarries at Carrara. Here, because of the Pope's financial stake in the discovery, he sends Michelangelo, not only to seek out the marble, but to build roads from the sea to the best sources. The days stretch to weeks. The weeks to months. The months to years. As time wastes and difficulties multiply, His letters home reflect the strain.
Oh, cursed 1,000 times the day and hour I left Carrara. I might well have undertaken to raise the dead as to tame these mountains.
But God does not assist him, as anyone can read in the facade of San Lorenzo today, barren as it ever was. Pope Leo abandons the project, wasting 3 years not only in the life of Michelangelo, who carves not a single figure during this time, but in the art heritage of the world.
I do not reckon the wooden model for the facade. I do not reckon the 3 years gone. I do not reckon the insult of having the work removed from me. For what reason, I know not. Only that Pope Leo takes the quarry and marbles, and I have but the little money I hold in my hand, and I'm given my liberty.
During the brief comparative peace that follows, to attend the altar of Santa Maria sopra Minerva in Rome, Michelangelo sends from Florence a risen Christ, a figure promised years earlier. He leaves the final details to an assistant to complete there, who, hastily reports a sculptor friend, spoiled the marble where he touched it, working it like a biscuit maker. Distressed, Michelangelo offers to carve a new one, but they prefer to keep it as it is, a Christ triumphant over the cross, his imperfect but powerful nude torso as only Michelangelo could conceive it. Soon, all too soon, with the accession of another Medici to the papal throne, Clement VII, Michelangelo has neither time for private matters nor to continue Julius's monument. Clement, promising to quiet the descendants of Julius, resolves that Michelangelo instead fashion a new sacristy at San Lorenzo and place within it tombs for his own Medici ancestors. Michelangelo, as ordered, designs and builds the new sacristy. And afterwards, for the next 10 years of his life, from around age 50 in 1524 to age 60 in 1534, he carves upon the Medici tombs almost as if entombed himself.
I did not believe that there was any other punishment than that in hell.
Closed within the cold marble prison built to honor 2 decadent Medici dukes, Michelangelo inveighs against his problems in his letters to Rome as he labors on.
Oh, the confusion. I could write you of things that would astonish you, only I should never be believed.
And always gnawing at his conscience, the unfinished sepulcher of Julius II. Strangely, the calm result of that work, monuments more fit for the ages than for the dukes, in no way hints of his discontent. Giuliano, Duke of Nemours.
It looks not like the Duke? What matters? Who will care 1,000 years from now?
At his feet, 2 extraordinary figures. First, day, awakening. The The marble barely torn from its face, it is almost richer in its superb incompletion. Night. Fast asleep, she is attended watchfully by her companion, the bird of darkness. For the sleeping figure of night, Michelangelo writes a poem.
Dear is my sleep, but more to be mere stone, so long as ruin and dishonor reign. To hear naught, to feel naught, is my great gain. Then wake me not, speak in an undertone.
Lorenzo, Duke of Urbino, at whose feet lies dawn, reluctant to awake. And on the other side, in rough splendor relaxed, evening. Only once does Michelangelo pause in his work, long enough to hold in his arms, fearlessly, his dying brother Buonarrota, who passes on with the plague. Suddenly, 6 years after he'd begun, Michelangelo's preoccupation with the Medici sculptures is interrupted by the siege of Florence. As his native city's leading architect, he puts aside his work for Pope Clement to take charge instead of building the fortifications against him. These still standing. The Pope, having made peace with Charles V of Spain, whose armies had earlier sacked Rome, sends in vengeance troops upon Florence. Florence, which has refused to sign the peace, has rid itself of its Medici despot, Alessandro, and declares itself a republic. Florence falls. Michelangelo, fearful of the Pope's wrath, hastens into hiding. Writes Condivi, one of Michelangelo's two contemporary biographers.
When Clement's fury abated, he wrote to Florence, ordering a search be made for Michelangelo, and adding that when he was found, if he agreed to go on working on the Medici monuments, he should be left at liberty and treated with courtesy.
Thus, out of fear of the Pope, Michelangelo returns to his carving at San Lorenzo. With the figures he'd already carved looking on, Michelangelo continues, and as he works, one day he hears brought to him, 5 years after his brother's passing, the news of his father's death. Perhaps then, at that moment, this holy figure he may have been carving no longer marks the tomb of his benefactor Lorenzo alone, symbolizing the end of his work inside the Medici chapel. But in his mind's eye, this superb Madonna becomes his memorial to his father as well.
From thy dying, I now learn to die. In thought I see thy place, where earth but rarely lets men climb the sky. There, by God's grace, I trust that thou art nursed, and hope to find thee, if but my cold heart high reason draw from earthly slime accursed.
Wealthy were the Medici in illuminated manuscripts. Numbered among the valuable codices in Latin and Greek, as well as Italian, were some of the finest pearls of the illuminator's art. To house them, here off the cloister of San Lorenzo, Michelangelo the sculptor, with his familiar complaint, this time,
Architecture is not my profession.
Michelangelo designs a sublime piece of architecture, the Laurentiana Library. This is the great hall containing the lecterns for the preservation of the codices. Both the lecterns and the wooden ceiling are to Michelangelo's design. The design of the ceiling. All combine to create a reverential atmosphere for study, though Michelangelo himself never saw it finished. With the measure of peace that returns to Florence after the siege, Michelangelo somehow finds time to reward a friend, Baccio Valori, who had helped him when he was in danger of arrest. For him, he carves this marble Apollo, shown in the act of drawing an arrow from his quiver. But suddenly exposed to the hatred of the illegitimate tyrant, Duke Alessandro, who had returned in triumph with Clement's armies, Michelangelo abandons not only his work on the tombs, but the Apollo as well. And perhaps with a last look at his David, Michelangelo leaves Florence, though he could not know it then, forever. Two days after Michelangelo reaches Rome, in September 1534, Pope Clement VII, the third pope he had served before the age of 60, dies. The succeeding deaths, harvest of the fleeting years, seem suddenly to weary the artist.
I have a bell ringing in my ears. My memory and my mind have gone before me to wait in another world, To work one day, I must rest 4. I am betrayed by my mirror.
But then, seeming to appear out of nowhere, there is Tommaso de' Cavalieri, after whom this statue, the genius of victory, is said to be modeled. This young Roman gentleman serves to answer Michelangelo's crying need for companionship and to remain his friend until the end. And now the papal chair is Pope Paul's, Paul III, successor to Clement, whose turn it is to demand that Michelangelo put aside the tomb of Julius and serve him.
I have been waiting 30 years for thee, and now that I am Pope, contract or no, I will not be denied.
As he stands before the papal throne in the Pope's private chapel, the Sistine, the very one Michelangelo had entered before to paint the ceiling with the story of creation, Pope Paul shows him a blank wall and tells him his wish, the same that had been Clement's before he died.
Paint us there a scene of the Last Judgment.
In October of 1541, already a morose old man of 66, Michelangelo at last is done and stands aside for Rome, caught up in the throes of the Inquisition that followed the Protestant Reformation of Luther, to be literally paralyzed by what it sees. As the angels sound their trumpets of doom, up from his throne rises an angry Christ, his Virgin Mother turning away from what is to come. Overhead, a flight of angels bear the column, the cross, and the symbols of his passion. Down fall the damned to hell. Up from purgatory mount the blessed. Salvation, damnation, the faces of both a harvest of fear. Small wonder that when Paul III enters to see what has been created, he falls on his knees before it and cries,
Lord, charge me not with my sins when thou shalt come on thy day of judgment.
And from the wall, looking down on him, in the flayed skin of St. Bartholomew, his tormented image hidden for 20 years before it was discovered, enclosed like the marrow in its pelt, committing himself to judgment, Michelangelo. For the brief, self-owned months that follow upon the Last Judgment, Michelangelo, seemingly obsessed with thoughts of the advancing years, returns momentarily to his unfinished figures for the tomb of Julius, each called by a name even more fitting for himself, the prisoner. He writes,
Precious art, in which for so long I enjoyed such great renown, it has brought me here, poor, old, and a slave to others.
As if to repay him for time lost, God gives him, to brighten his autumnal years, Vittoria Colonna, widow, poetess, descendant of the noblest family in Italy, living in retirement for a time among the nuns at a convent in Viterbo. For years that later must have seemed to him so few, he enjoys, platonically, with the only woman in his life, the warmest friendship. As here in the Pauline Chapel, he now begins to paint for the Pope two frescoes, the Crucifixion of St. Peter and the Conversion of St. Paul. They exchange correspondence.
To Vittoria Colonna, blessed Spirit, who with loving tenderness quickenest my heart so old and near to die, who mid thy joys on me dost bend an eye, though many nobler men around thee press.
But even with this new solace, there hangs over him the ominous shadow of the tomb of Julius II. He petitions Pope Paul.
I am told I must paint and have no anxiety. I answer that one paints with his brain and not with his hands. On the strength of a contract for the tomb made before Clement, I am daily stoned as if I had crucified Christ. My whole youth and manhood have been lost, tied down to this tomb.
And so in 1545, here in the church of San Pietro in Vincoli, 40 years since he first left for Carrara in search of stone for it, a fragment, the merest fragment, of his great concept for Julius's tomb is installed, and the endless burden that had marred his whole adult life lifted at last from aging shoulders. With much of the work completed by others, this shadow of a tomb echoes as well the brief glow he enjoys from the light of Vittoria Colonna, who dies 2 years later, leaving him in desolation. Only the magnificent Moses sings of the genius of Michelangelo, and in a sense, reflects these fragments of sonnets he wrote to her both before and after her passing.
How can it be, lady? Shapes that seem alive, wrought in hard mountain marble, will survive their maker, whom the years to dust return. Heaven has taken away from me the splendor of the great fire that burned and nourished me. I am left to be a coal, covered and burning, a single spark, all into ashes turning.
These embellishing details give evidence still of another aspect of Michelangelo's later years. Michelangelo, architect. And all the while, like counterpoint to his artistic creations, he deals with the mundane matters of his relatives in Florence, with one hand designing a unique monument, with the other, incongruously, writing one letter after the other advising on intimate personal problems. Porta Pia, a gate of Rome.
Nephew Leonardo, I have written you about your getting married. There should always be 10 years difference between the age of a husband and wife, and she should be healthy as well as good. Don't worry about a dowry. You need a wife you can command, and who does not want to put on airs and go off every day to parties where virtue is easily lost.
The climax of Michelangelo's architectural genius comes when, already an old man of 72, Pope Paul forces him to assume the heavy responsibilities of chief architect of St. Peter's, the most monumental project of his age, in which every major architect of the 16th century had had a part. For 17 years, he is held in the spell of St. Peter's, work for which he refuses to take a penny. Thus it is that today, as one looks upon his proudest architectural creation, much as he dreamed of it, soaring in space above the ancient city, one can give everlasting thanks to his sacred devotion.
For the love of God.
Tuesday, February 18, in the year 1564, in the attitude of a perfect Christian, and about the hour of the Ave Maria.
Now hath my life across a stormy sea, like a frail bark, reached that wide port where all are bidden ere the final reckoning fall of good and evil for eternity. Now know I well how that fond fantasy, which made my soul the worshipper and thrall of earthly art, is vain. Painting nor sculpture now can lull to rest my soul that turns to his great love on high, whose arms to clasp us on the cross were spread.
Michelangelo, the last giant, returned to the master that had sent him.